Thankfully, and spoiler alert, Project Big Picture was rejected. But I think it's still important to go through the proposed changes within the now infamous document, as I am almost positive that aspects of it will be included in some sort of reform in the very near future in order to save English clubs from bankruptcy. And so, let's break this up into sections and take a balanced look at this. Who came up with it? Who benefits from each facet? Similarities I've seen in other sports, how this could just be a starting place to get the ball rolling on restructuring things, and perhaps some small changes that could actually be beneficial to English football. It's not all bad, in my opinion, but there are some absolutely glaring aspects that simply cannot happen and would be to the detriment of English football. But for now, let's see what Project Big Picture had intended to implement, as like I said earlier, I'm sure some aspects of it will be carried over into another version of reform. We won't talk about every mind-numbing detail, just the potentially most impactful and interesting, the need-to-know ones, so that we can give them the discussion they deserve, instead of just going through everything. It looks as though Rick Perry, the chairman of the English Football League, came up with the idea to revolutionize the makeup and financial distribution of English football. So, according to Sam Wallace of The Telegraph, the publication that broke the story, which I of course linked to below, the details of the document were written by Fenway Sports Group and had the support of Manchester United as well, via Joel Glazer. According to Wallace, Perry had apparently been in talks with John Henry and the Glazers since about 2017, but after the pandemic had rocked English football, namely the teams playing below the Premier League, the talks had been drastically accelerated. Basically, this aspect is pretty easy to understand. Premier League clubs would take out a collective loan of £250 million and give it to the English Football League to help offset the losses from no matchday profits, the biggest moneymaker for non-Premier League clubs, given that the broadcast deals for the Championship and all leagues below are laughable in comparison to the Premier Leagues. We've seen clubs in Germany give up some of their revenues in order to help clubs at the lower half of the table and in the second division, and so it only seems logical that teams in the Premier League would do the same. These kinds of funds could save plenty of teams from bankruptcy, as it is looking like fans won't be in stadiums for the foreseeable future in the United Kingdom, as the second wave has basically turned into a tsunami. On top of this, there was to be a one-off £100 million gift to the FA to help with any of the losses that they had due to the pandemic. A little sweetening of the pot for the FA to be on board with the Project Big Picture. One of the biggest changes beyond the financial aspects that surround Project Big Picture was the proposed changes to the structure of the Premier League. The document proposed that the Premier League be changed from a 20-team competition to just 18 teams. And again, we can look to Germany for some similarities here, as it's nearly the same sort of structure. The teams finishing in 17th and 18th in the Premier League would be relegated to the Championship, just as the top two teams from the Championship would be automatically promoted. Instead of the teams finishing from 3rd to 6th in the Championship taking part in a promotion playoff, the teams from 3rd to 5th will take part in one. But that equals out to 3 teams. How does that work? Well, by including the 16th place team from the Premier League to round it out to 4 teams. As mentioned, Germany, among other countries, do something similar, not exactly the same, as the 16th place team from the Bundesliga plays against the 3rd place team from Bundesliga 2. It's a two-legged affair between the two teams, whereas in England, they would retain some of their tradition in having the promotion playoff contested between multiple teams from the Championship, but a Premier League side would be thrown in there to boot. So if the Premier League side wins, they end up staying in the Premier League, and only 2 teams from the Championship would make it up to the Premier League. Obviously, the Championship clubs wouldn't be too happy with a Premier League club thrown in their way, but perhaps it is something they could have looked past given the next part of Project Big Picture. As things stand currently with the current deal, all of the profits from the Premier League, sponsorship deals, broadcasting rights, etc. are divided as follows. 92% of it is given to Premier League clubs on a merit basis that takes into account final league position, how many times they appeared on television within the UK, stuff like that. And then the final 8% to make up the 100% was given to EFL clubs. The new proposal would see the Premier League profits divided amongst the Premier League clubs, from which they would get 75% of the total profits from the Premier League. 50% of the 75%, apologies, I realize that sounds like it works 50% of the time, all the time sort of statement, but 50% of the 75% that was allotted to Premier League clubs would be divided equally amongst all of them. 25% of that would then be divided based on final league position, and the final 25% would be awarded via a 3-year aggregate, in essence how well your club has done over the past 3 years within the Premier League. The final aspect there will safeguard a team from having a nightmare season and then suffering financially because of it. But it also sort of ensures that the biggest clubs that consistently finish near the top, we're talking in the top 6 or so, will always get a larger slice of the pie. The biggest winners in all of this, however, would be the EFL clubs. They would see a jump from just 8% of profits to 25%, receiving over 3 times as much as they had in the past. As Matt Slater mused for The Athletic, this would work out as follows for the EFL clubs. This is Christmas every day for owners and finance directors. The percentage of the total income each league gets more than triples, with the average championship club seeing its income rise by £15.5 million, League 1 clubs getting £3.5 million more, and League 2 clubs enjoying a boost of £2.3 million. Part of the aim of this aspect was to ensure that there would be fewer matches to play, though this was of course very Premier League centric. How? Well, first off, they wanted to scrap League Cup, which would bring the Premier League's top teams down from playing in 4 competitions to just 3 if they are of course playing in Europe. Premier League, European competition, and FA Cup. That's it. That's far more manageable and would be a good thing for those teams. But in doing so, that would also take away the potential for smaller teams to play away to the bigger teams of the country. Take Rochdale versus Manchester United, for example, from last season. As United-centric journalist Mark Ogden mentioned, Rochdale's trip to Old Trafford last season in the EFL Cup saw them make around £400,000, which according to him covered about 3 months worth of operating costs for the League One club. That's huge. But given the other proposal that would see the EFL clubs, again, clubs in the Championship, League 1 and League 2, receive 25% of the Premier League's profits, then they could easily forget about the winning the lottery aspect of being drawn against a big team in the EFL Cup. It would also hurt the clubs within the Premier League that aren't participating in European competition, as they too would miss out on profits from gate receipts and television rights for the few matches that they play in the League Cup. As for the Community Shield, I mean, beyond it carrying some tradition within England, I don't know that there are many that would choose keeping the Community Shield as a hill to die on right now. Changes to distribution rights. It has been mooted that clubs would be able to hold the rights to 8 matches per season, in which they would be exclusively aired through their own distribution services. Essentially, this would mean that 8 matches throughout the Premier League season wouldn't be available through a large broadcasting company, be that Sky Sports, DAZN if you're in Canada like myself, etc. And instead, you would have to use a paid streaming service directly through the club to watch those 8 matches. This is nothing new. It's a model that has been used in North American sports before. When I was a kid, I followed hockey a little more closely. Naturally, of course, being Canadian, now I couldn't tell you a thing about it. And throughout the season, there would be times where you just could not find your team playing on TV. Why? Because you had to be subscribed to Canucks TV or what have you. An additional cost on top of your monthly television fee. And if you didn't do that, you were restricted to catching just the highlights once the match was over. And so given that 2 of the teams that are pushing for this are United and Liverpool, and given that their owners are American, eventually adopting this pay-per-view exclusively for a few matches per season, I mean, it's not all that surprising, is it? But if they move towards this new model, suddenly the number of people that would pay to see Southampton versus Brighton will basically be restricted to their own fans, and given that their following worldwide is much smaller than the top 6 clubs, their broadcast revenue for the season would be drastically lower. Conversely, the big teams will still have no problem in having people worldwide pay to see Manchester United or Liverpool or Arsenal play against anyone in the league, really, from the top to the bottom of the league. I obviously can't give you percentages, but the big clubs with massive worldwide followings would benefit from this, as it would be additional income for them, while the mid-table to bottom of the table clubs would suffer and largely be reliant upon their far more local fan bases to purchase these matches, most of which, I'm sure, would just head down to the pub to watch it, pandemic willing, of course. Because what happens when there's a pay-per-view event? A match, a fight, what have you. Either you go to a bar that's showing it, so you don't have to buy it yourself, or you and some friends split it and watch it together. And in doing so, the profits will be cut massively for these clubs. Instead of a bar full of, let's say, 30 to 50 people all purchasing Southampton versus Brighton match, the bar is the only one that actually paid for it. This aspect of the proposal is one that I'm sure everyone would love to see put into practice. Big Picture proposed that tickets for away matches get capped at £20 per ticket. Amazing, considering some of the extortionate prices for away fans at times. On top of this, they wanted to see the minimum allocation for away fans to be lifted up to 3,000, and they wanted to start the conversation with regard to allowing safe standing sections. This, of course, would have to be approved by the government. Finally, though, I know and understand football's past in England and why safe standing sections were banned, but this will be a massive breath of fresh air and will really add to the atmosphere of Premier League matches. It's a win for the fan culture in England. This one was arguably the biggest no-no in the entirety of the proposal. As things stand currently, decisions in the Premier League are made via vote, with every club's vote being made equal. And in order for a new rule or regulation or what have you to pass, 14 of the 20 clubs must vote in favor of it or against it. Project Big Picture looked to change that, however, in that they wanted to shift the power to 9 clubs that they deemed to be, quote, long-term shareholders within the Premier League when it came to making decisions around certain topics, which I will go over in a second. These long-term shareholders are pretty easy to guess. The big 6 being Arsenal, Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, and Tottenham, plus Everton, West Ham, and Southampton. So what they wanted to see was these 9 teams having exclusive decision-making rights around things such as Sam Wallace from The Telegraph noted, amending rules and regulations, agreeing contracts, removal of the chief executive, that's of the Premier League by the way, and a wide-ranging veto including on club ownership. So these massive decisions would be made by 9 clubs, essentially, of which they would only need a 2/3 vote in favor of or against a proposal in order for it to pass or be vetoed. The most egregious of which, in my eyes, is the ability to veto a financial takeover of another club. Let's say Burnley suddenly had a rich foreign investor that wanted to take over the club and pump money into it. If 6 of the 9 clubs voted against it, then the takeover would be blocked. 6 clubs of 20 could block that from happening. It's outrageous, as the self-interested decisions of those 6 clubs out of 20 call the shots, or 6 clubs out of 18 if the change to the league structure was incorporated. Regardless, 6 teams being able to call the shots in the Premier League would just continue to entrench the disparity of power and finances within English football. And so on Wednesday, yesterday, the 20 Premier League teams all met and voted against Project Big Picture, unsurprisingly of course, meaning at least 14 of the 20 clubs voted against it, as that is the requirement for a majority when it comes to voting. There are some reports, namely from the extremely trustworthy Sam Wallace, that said that it was a unanimous rejection of Big Picture, but we don't know for sure just yet. What was agreed upon was that the 20 clubs will hold an emergency meeting to discuss how they can address the elephant in the room, the looming threat of bankruptcy for plenty of English clubs should the pandemic continue, and how they can approach this, which it's going to, and how they can approach this hardship, which is partially, though not entirely, a byproduct of the pandemic, and how they can sort of level the playing field further. In closing, one thing I think we can all agree upon is that a good competition is a fair competition. Now, of course, there is a time and place to argue whether the competition in the Premier League is fair to begin with, given that there are certain clubs with billionaires that put their clubs ahead of the competition. But with the changes that have been mentioned, while there are definitely some positives and some negatives, the overarching question has got to be this. Does this improve competition in England? Does this improve the competitiveness of the football in England, namely in the Premier League? Overall, no, it doesn't. And it was a good thing that it was turned down and that the Premier League clubs will have a united front, no pun intended, in addressing changes that need to be made in order to keep English football afloat and in order for it to thrive. There are some positives that were mentioned, providing further financial support for the lower league teams, capping away ticket prices. I think it is worth exploring the idea of scrapping the League Cup, but there are some very worrying proposals as well, namely the voting power that would be given to the top clubs and how that could kill competition and further handcuff any teams that had interested foreign buyers or domestic buyers, as well as the media rights distributions. We'll see what happens. I think that 1, it was never meant to be seen by the public and was a work in progress, and 2, if anything, hopefully it will get the ball rolling on improving the football and the finances of teams across England, no matter the level. Alright guys, I'm Adrian. I thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it and learned something new, be sure to subscribe or drop a like. It really helps out the channel. Alright, I hope to see you in the next video. Take care of yourself. Bye!